Hey guys, in this video we're going to be submitting our form to our server, but before we do that there's a small bug I want to fix. So for whatever reason, when we go to the next page and then when we go to the final page, you'll notice we get like a log in the console, and this is actually a submit happening. So for whatever reason, when we come to this last page, it automatically submits the form. I'm not really sure why, but one of you guys were experiencing this as well. And the fix is to just wrap it in a div, and it seems to not submit whenever you go to that page. So this is me just wrapping the div around the create listing button that we have. And now if we try this again, click through, you'll notice there's no log and it doesn't submit the form. So cool. So we don't want to just be submitting as soon as we get to this page. We want to allow them to actually fill out their latitude and add amenities beforehand. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. Now we're going to be working with the controller package because we're going to be adding something, both the app and this is going to need the website. And now we could follow the same kind of structure we have before, where we create a controller class, like how we did in login, where we have our GraphQL code here, and basically we create a component that passes down a prop like this, a submit prop, and then that's what they call. But we can actually eliminate this middle class, or we can at least eliminate one class, because really we're just creating a function here. Now if we were doing other things, this controller class can be useful, but really we're just creating a single function and passing it down to the next thing. And so there's a way to do this nicely with Apollo, which I'm about to show you. So I'm going to create a new module, and we can just do this in a single package, I guess. Well, I guess we've been using folders, so I'll create a new folder, and I'm going to call this create listing, and I'm going to say index.tsx. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just write out the GraphQL code. So I'm going to import GQL. Yeah, we'll go ahead and import. So from GraphQL tag GQL, and I'm going to say const create listing mutation. Now I've already written out the mutation because it is quite long, so I'm going to paste it here, and you guys can copy if you want. So if you want to just pause the video and copy all this down. Basically we just have all our data and variables. That way we can pass different stuff from our form. Alright, so now that we have this GQL, the next step is to create the types for it. So while in the controller package, I'm going to say yarn gen types, and we can come over to our schema types. I'll open that up. Alright, so it was successful. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to export a higher order component now. So I'm going to say export const, and I'm going to call this create listing, and I'll keep it lowercase, create listing higher order component. Another way you could name this is maybe like with create listing. That's a common name you'll see for higher order components, so maybe we'll do that. And I'm going to say GraphQL, and this is going to be the GraphQL component from React Apollo. So let's import that. Alright, now we're going to put all the information that we want here. So the information I want is the name of the mutation that I want to run, which is this guy right here. So the create listing mutation. And so normally when we do this, we would then call the component, right? So like usually I'll say C for the component, but we're actually going to do this in our front end, which you'll see in a second. But I'm going to pass in the props right here. So I'm going to say the first thing is our component props can be anything. Our mutation props are going to be create listing mutation and create listing mutation variables. And now we can pass some options, and the options we're going to pass, the one we care about is the props. So I'm going to do it like this. So what props is we can actually take the mutation that we have here and pass props to whatever component we wrap, and we're going to give it a custom function that basically just calls this mutation. In this case, we're really just passing directly here. There's not really any middle things that we need to do. So for example, in the login over here, we were checking if there's any errors and we were saving the session and whatnot. We don't really have that in this case. Now we may want to do some error checking, so that's worth doing here as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to return a function. I'm going to call this function createListing. And what createListing is going to do is it's going to take the variables that this mutation should take. So in this case, I'm going to say these variables. And now TypeScript is not liking it because there's actually a third prop or a fourth prop that we can pass to this GraphQL higher order component, and that is what props we pass. So the prop in this case is going to be called createListing. So we can create an interface, and this is helpful to export because this is something basically the front end will use, which we'll see in a second. So maybe we call it like new props that createListing will add. And so this is going to add createListing, which is going to be a function which has variables. And now I'm duplicating my definition, which I don't really need to do. I'm going to say void right now. What I can do is, now that I'm typing it up here, I can pass that type as the fourth parameter, new props. And now I don't have to say the type definition here. If I hover, you can see the type is right there, createListing mutation variables, and it knows that because I specified it right here and we passed that in here. Alright, so now we can do whatever we want in this createListing function, and our function that we have right here that we pass initially to props, this actually has some stuff that we care about. So we care about this function called mutate, right? So this is actually how we call the mutation. And now, if you saw when I hovered over that, the mutation can possibly be undefined. So I'm going to say if mutate is undefined, then we're just going to return. In the case where mutation is, or mutate is undefined, is you can actually pass skip as a parameter to GraphQL, and it'll basically skip creating this. But we don't have to worry about that. We're not skipping anything. But here we're going to call mutate. And here I'm just going to pass in the variables that we get here. Now at this point, this higher order component is not really that much helpful than just doing this exact thing on, just doing it over here in the, not the server, but we could just do this right over here, right? It'll become more useful though when we have updates, which we're going to be covering in a future video. But after I mutate, I want to update the cache. So it's nice to not have to write the update function for the cache in multiple places. But this is all we need to do here, at least for now. And now I can use this with createListing in my website. So I'm going to export it, and we'll say createListing. Oops, there we go. And now I think when we build this, we'll get an error, or at least I usually get an error. Let's see if we get an error when we build this. And it has to do with not exporting React. So here it says using the name React component class. So basically GraphQL uses the type, some type from React, and we're not importing it. So what we have to do is we have to import React here. So import from React. And now we're basically saying we're good because we're importing it, and GraphQL is using some types. But the problem I face is now this is never read, and so TypeScript's like, you have a variable you've never used, right? So why am I importing React TypeScript is telling me, why am I importing React if you're not going to use it? Even though we're kind of like implicitly using it with this down here. So I don't really know how to handle this case the best way. So if anyone's better than TypeScript, please let me know in the comments below. But what I do is kind of a hacky solution. So we're not using React right now, so why don't we just use it? So this type is already any. You can see the type is any. So what I do is I cast it to any, and I do and React, and I just pick a random type that I want, so maybe abstract view. So now I'm using a type from React, so it's not complaining. And of course, any with anything is going to be just any, so it doesn't affect the type here. But now I'm using this, so it's just like a little hack to get this to build. I'm sure there's probably a better way to do this, but I don't know what it is, but you'll see it builds just fine now. Alright, so now I want to use this with create listing component in my front end over here. And that's, by the way, why I on the front end I didn't create like a create listing form. I just put it inside of here, because now I'm just going to use that higher order component and call it from the submit here. Alright, so now I'm going to not export this. I'm going to call it C. I'm going to copy it first. So I'm just going to call it C, and then down here I'm going to export const, and we're going to say with create listing. And now we're going to import that. And that's coming from our controller. And not getting create listing. Let's restart. Oops. I want to restart my TypeScript server. I have no idea why I just changed pages. And I think it should, when it restarts, it should see that create listing is in there. I think I exported it. So I exported with create listing. And it's sometimes useful to also export this mutation or the actual GraphQL. Sometimes that can be useful, so I'll go ahead and export this. We're not going to use it right now, so I don't need to rebuild. But we are, in fact, exporting it here, so I think we should be good. Yep, so now it's good. So with create listing, and it imports okay now. So now we have an extra function on this. Now normally we would do like child props or whatever to pass in the props, but this is why I created that class over here that we exported. I can now use this for my type definitions over here. So I can import new props create listing, and then I can pass it as my one of my props over here, and new props create listing. And so now I have access to that thing. So I can say this.props, and you can see we have that create listing function that we created. So this create listing is this thing right here. It's this function. So it takes variables and it's just going to call mutate. And now, I mean, ideally we probably make this asynchronous and we await this, but I don't think we need to rebuild. It should still run. I kind of want to console log what the response is too. So maybe like that, and then console.log response. Alright, let's go ahead and rebuild real quick, because I do want to see what we get back from this. But now I can call that here. Oops. Create listing, and looks like TypeScript's tied up with that building. And now the type of values right here is going to be form values, because it's just all these items that we have from our form. And I think we can directly just pass in values. We'll see if there's anything. Nope. Looks like it works just fine. I wasn't sure if there was a specific value that was different from our GraphQL from our form, but it looks like it goes one-to-one inside of that. Alright, let's try submitting now and see if we can actually create something. And actually, before I do that, let's make sure the server is up and running okay. Looks like it's not, so having trouble. So go ahead and restart it. And my database server or our node server looks like it's fine. And I'm going to just run the find listing. So right now I have 0 things in the database. So when we create something, after we fill it out, we should be able to do this just fine. And I'm curious whether I'm going to get a error here. Variable name must be lower camel case or Pascal case. I wonder if that's an actual error. It looks like it's still building over here. Okay, so this is something I just an error I've experienced before. So it says we were attempting to import this outside your project. So the reason I get that is because I added that path thing to my tsconfig. If I remove it, it builds just fine. So I need to create basically 2 tsconfigs. I haven't done it yet. One that works for actually building the project, and one that works in Visual Studio Code. Because if I add it back, this works nicely for Visual Studio Code. It allows me to auto import stuff well, but it won't allow me to build. So I need 2 tsconfigs, and I think there is a way to set that up. So I'm going to try setting that up for next video. And then for now, that's my little trick though to get around it. I don't know if you guys were following how I did that. I basically got rid of it, started the server. It goes fine, and then I paste it back because the server does not reread the tsconfig here until you restart it. Alright, so let's create this listing. Price is going to be that, beds that. Sure, let's do an actual thing. We're going to have 2 guests, 23 beds, latitude, longitude, amenities, basketball. I didn't spell that well. That's okay. Alright, so creating the listing true. Come over here to our playground. Select. Looks like it created okay. Let's do amenities. We can see our basket and whatnot. So it looks like it adds it okay. So nice. So we hooked it up correctly. One last thing I want to do real quick. I don't know if I talked about this with our other form, but there is some interesting things that Formic gives us that we can make our form a little bit more robust. So the first thing is submitting. So this is a prop that is true, or that's a boolean, and it's true if the form is submitting. So what you can do is on this is our button that causes a submit to happen. So I can say disabled, and I can say that it's disabled when we're submitting. So I'm saying disable this form whenever we're submitting. And you may ask, why would you want to disable the button when we're after we submitted? Reason for this is you don't want people to double click. So if I were to double click the button, we would fire off 2 quick creations. So let's see if I can show you guys that. Let's actually take the disable off, right? And try clicking on the button twice pretty fast, and we'll see if you see how 2 fired off real quick. Now the server responds so fast that I'm not sure I can actually this will actually work, but we can try. Disabled is submitting. The other thing is you can prevent submissions from happening if the form has any errors in it. Alright, so you see how I can now not submit. So alright, so here I'm actually never allowing myself to submit again. So you see how it disabled? It thinks we're still submitting. So the way you allow your form to be able to be submitted again is there's actually a second prop or parameter on submit here, and the type of it is formic actions, form values. And the way this type works is you have to angle brackets and then what your form values are. One of the props here, there's lots of good ones. So there's reset form, which is handy. The thing we're going to be doing is set submitting, and we're going to say set submitting to false. So, and we're going to wait, and we're going to make this function asynchronous. Alright, so now after we create the listing, we set submitting to false, which means we allow them to submit again. So next page, I create a listing, it's disabled for like a millisecond, however long it takes to make this request, and now I can make more requests if I want. So that's a nice way to kind of prevent double clicking and have your submit. The other thing I was talking about, we don't currently have any validation on this, but there's a prop here called isValid. So it says if the form is valid, and you can say is not valid or is submitting. So this is a common thing I see and that I use myself, is if the form is not valid, don't let them submit. Now we don't have any form submission validation, but you probably should add form validation to this. Again, you can probably just do that in the same way we did with the login. That's what I would recommend, and add a login schema. I'm not going to do it because we're pretty much just going to do the same thing that we did for the login, but if we're making this for real, you'd want to do that. So that's it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching.